The girl left school and went home, but she never reached her destination. As soon as the police began to investigate the case, they were faced with a host of suspects, each of whom larked dark and suspicious stories. But despite this, the detectives were unable to solve the case for many years, until a chain of rather random events led to an unexpected truth that shook the entire city. Friends, before we start the investigation, please subscribe to our channel, it really helps us grow. Tina Phelps was born on April 27, 1969 in the state of Washington. When she was little, her parents divorced, and the girl moved with her mom to California, settling in a small town called Pinon Hills. Soon her mom married a man named Steve, and they had a son. Tina, who was only 6 years old at the time, was happy to help take care of the baby, and they often left her to look after him despite being so young. Tina grew up very independent and began to make plans for the future from the very childhood. Already in high school, the girl began to think about what college she would go to, and also began to save up to buy her own car. In 1984, when she was 14, Tina was in her first year of high school, a place she wasn't particularly excited about. She was rather modest and quiet and stuck to her small circle of friends. Because of this, the other girls at school started to bully her, and Tina even considered changing schools. On April 1st, her day got off to a bad start. When she arrived at the school cafeteria, a group of other girls started bullying her again and even threatened to pick her up after school. The school was generally considered to be a troubled school, and Tina had gotten in solely because it was the closest to her home. For example, on the same day there was another incident at their school. Some boy stuck their classmate in a street trash can, and when the teacher discovered him, he realized that this boy was very drunk. It turned out that several students had brought alcohol with them and were drinking it right during the school day. Tina's mom suggested she transfer to another school, but the girl wanted to wait until the end of the year, which was only a few months away. On this day, in addition to being bullied by her classmates, Tina was also required to stay after school as punishment for often being late for her first lessons. Tina originally traveled to school and home on the school bus, but she was forced to stop using it because of these girls who bullied her throughout the trip. From then on, she was driven by her mom, who also had to get ready for work in the mornings, so Tina was late quite often. But despite this, she still got her punishment. However, the girl decided not to stay after school and go home. Although her home was close enough, the road was quite winding. First, she had to follow a small path that led to an underpass under the highway, and then walk a few hundred meters to her house. Tina left the school at about 2:50 and headed home. At the same time, there were other children walking along the path, but they all went in different directions and the girl was left alone. About 20 minutes later, a man was passing by on the highway above the particular underpass and noticed that there was a man lying on the ground next to the path, not far from the tunnel entrance. He thought this was rather odd, so he decided to turn around the nearest curve and stop near the spot to take a closer look. When he was back above the crossing, the man realized that there was a human body lying there and immediately went to look for the nearest payphone to call the police. On the way, he spotted a police car and informed the officers of his discovery. Around the same time, the police also received a call from other school children who were walking along the path and came across the body. The police immediately went to the place and found the girl's body. They immediately realized from the amount of blood that she had been stabbed multiple times and started investigating. The first thing they noticed was that her bag was hanging from a tree a few meters away from the body. The examination of the crime scene did not yield any significant results. The police collected many items that were lying around, such as cigarette butts, but their connection to the case seemed highly unlikely. There was no murder weapon nearby either. After detectives informed Tina's mother about the incident, they also ruled out robbery with her help. as none of the girl's personal belongings were missing. Thus, the investigators had to hope that medical experts and forensic experts could find some clues. But they didn't succeed either. They only found that the victim had been stabbed 44 times with a knife similar to a kitchen knife. Tina had not been abused, which ruled out another motive. Detectives eventually concluded that the crime was most likely committed by someone who knew the girl and had a strong dislike for her. Her mother told them that she had been bullied by other girls at school, and the police started checking each of them. However, the whole group was also punished that day and stayed after school, which was confirmed by the teacher's testimony. The police soon received another interesting lead. A high school student said that after school he drove along the highway near where Tina's body was found and saw a classmate named Jeff running toward the tunnel. Investigators quickly discovered that Jeff was a very troubled teenager. He was considered one of the biggest bullies in the school and regularly bullied other students. In addition, several girls accused him of touching them. But the most important fact which aroused suspicion among investigators was the information that the guy carried a knife with him all the time. The police went to talk to him and immediately noticed a fresh cut on his finger. The young man stated that he had cut himself at work while cutting pizza. However, he later changed his statement and said that he had cut himself when he was removing a van cover. That was enough to get a search warrant for his house. Detectives found 2 hunting knives. They were handed over to experts, but they could not find any traces of blood on either of them. Jeff himself also denied any involvement in Tina's murder, and the police simply had no reason to arrest him. The main problem was that they didn't have a single piece of evidence on their hands. They found nothing at the crime scene that could belong to the killer, including his fingerprints. There was also no biological trace that could later be used to obtain a DNA sample. With the advancement of technology, Jeff eventually remained on the suspect list while investigators continued to search for any other leads. They received a large number of leads, but they all led them to dead ends. Students at the school said they suspected one of their classmates of the murder, and some of them admitted to their friends that they had committed the crime. However, when detectives brought them in for questioning, they all claimed they were just making a bad joke and nothing to do with the murder. Soon the investigators started looking at Tina's mom's husband. They learned that the couple had recently separated because the man had started drinking heavily and behaving aggressively. Moreover, the woman's relatives and friends told investigators that the man raised his hand on Tina's mom, but the woman herself denied it. Despite the fact that they had recently broken up, the man tried to restore their relationship. Just a few days before the incident, he came to their home. Another argument ensued between them, and the girl started yelling at him to leave her mother alone. When detectives went to talk to him, the man said he was at work at the time of the incident. The police interviewed his co-workers and they confirmed that he was indeed with them. However, investigators went on to find out something very suspicious. After the man heard about Tina's death, he took a bus to a driver he knew and went to Tina's mother's house. The driver said that before getting out, the man handed him a knife and asked him to keep it for a while. It was extremely strange. However, the man said he simply found it inappropriate to come home to Tina's mother with a knife, given that her daughter had just been killed with the same type of weapon. Detectives investigated his possible involvement for some time, but the man's alibi was indisputable, so he was taken off the list of suspects. This went on for 5 days until the police suddenly had a new suspect. A young girl from a town called Felton, about 8 kilometers from Pinion Hills, was walking through an underpass when she was attacked by an unknown man. The perpetrator demanded that she do whatever he said, threatening to kill her. However, the girl managed to break free and escape, after which she immediately contacted the police. The detectives investigating Tina's murder became interested in the case because it strongly resembled the circumstances of that crime. Sometime later, the police managed to find and arrest the man. It turned out to be a Walter. Investigators immediately learned that he was living in Pinion Hills at the time of Tina's murder and left there immediately after the incident. Moreover, they learned that one day she was killed, the man came to his grandmother's house and was acting strangely. He was visibly upset and said that he didn't like where his life was going. After Walter was arrested for assault in another city, police officers obtained a search warrant for his home. They found clothes and knives that were also covered in blood. All these items were immediately handed over to the laboratory. However, the investigators were met with a very unexpected twist. All of this blood belonged to animals. Despite this, detectives continued to try to link Walter to Tina's murder, but it went nowhere. Eventually, they switched to looking for other leads. The police began to wonder if an unknown serial killer might be behind Tina's murder. Over the course of several months, 3 more young girls were murdered in and around Los Angeles, but police officers were unable to make progress on any of the cases. Nevertheless, they were beginning to suspect that the same perpetrator might be behind them. This version caused fear among the inhabitants of the city. Women were afraid to walk alone in the streets. Parents stopped letting their children go out unattended. There was a lot of pressure on the police department because everyone wanted the perpetrator behind bars as soon as possible. However, investigators have never been able to solve these cases. In the next few years, detectives never came any closer to solving the mystery. In 1985, another murder of a young girl took place in Pinon Hills. It happened just a few kilometers away from the scene of Tina's murder and also near an underpass. However, as with all past cases, investigators were no closer to catching the culprit. The next twist in the case came in the 1990s. By that time, DNA analysis was already actively used in forensics, and detectives who suspected a serial killer decided to use it. Experts re-examined the evidence and got a match to a biological sample from 30-year-old Michael Ahern, who was already serving time for the murder of a 6-year-old girl. Immediately after receiving a DNA match, Michael became a suspect in the cases of 3 other victims, including Tina. The police officers told Tina's mom about this suspect. She suddenly stated that she remembered the man. Looking at his picture, the woman said she had seen him at a barbecue a few years before the murder. She also recalled that she had kept photos of the event, but as soon as the woman found them, she realized her mistake. The man in the photo did look like a Michael, but it wasn't him. However, investigators have been trying for a long time to find any evidence that could link him to Tina's murder, but they have not succeeded. The man also could not be linked to the other 2 murders. However, he still received the death penalty for the case in which his DNA was matched. 2 years later, in 1996, detectives solved another case by getting a DNA sample match to a man named Robert Rhodes. But as in the previous case, police officers were unable to link this man to Tina's murder. In the years that followed, police had several more suspects, but they all denied involvement in the murder and the case never moved forward. This continued until 2007, when Detective Diane Savage became interested in the investigation. She was pregnant at the time, so she was unable to fulfill most of her duties. Instead, she decided to look into unsolved cases in their town and stumbled upon Tina's murder. After reviewing all the available materials, the detective was only convinced that there was not a single piece of evidence in the case that could lead to the identity of the suspect. Nevertheless, she noticed one odd fact: the victim's bag hanging from a tree. The detective realized that the girl was unlikely to have thrown it in there by herself during the attack, which meant it had to have been done by the killer. Given that by 2007, technology to study DNA had come quite far, Savage decided to try her luck and sent the bag to a lab for analysis. The fact is that criminals often accidentally wound themselves with their own knife during an attack. If they inflict a large number of blows, and as we remember, Tina received a total of 44 blows, Savage allowed that the attacker could have bled when he was hanging the bag on the tree. The local lab didn't have the necessary instruments capable of detecting such small and old traces of blood, so the bag was sent to an FBI lab. There she waited her turn for several years. It was not until March 2011 that Detective Savage received the long-awaited call. Experts from the FBI said they were indeed able to find blood particles on the back and extract a DNA profile from them. Moreover, as soon as this sample was uploaded to the database, they immediately got a match. Its owner was Stephen Carlson. Detective Savage was greatly surprised to hear that name, as she had considered the most likely suspect to be one of the other two criminals arrested earlier. However, Carlson's name was also familiar to her. He appeared in the case file. Stephen Carlson attended the same school as Tina. He was 16 years old at the time of the incident, and you and I already heard him at the beginning of the story. He was the same guy who was thrown into the dumpster next to the school the day Tina was killed. In addition, Stephen was also the same high school student who voiced his suspicions to the police about Jeff, the school's knife-wielding bully. But that was not all. During the investigation, the investigators already had thoughts about his possible involvement in the murder, but no confirmation of these suspicions could be found. In his school years, Stephen had a very strangle behavior that repulsed others. He often said dirty and obscene things to girls, behaved aggressively, and earned himself the nickname Creepy Carlson. Because all of this, Stephen was often bullied by other students. Around the age of 15, he started using illegal substances, which only exacerbated his behavior. He was repeatedly sent to juvenile prison, albeit for short periods of time. During those years, several of his acquaintances contacted the police at once and said that Stephen had confessed to them about Tina's murder. However, when they came to talk to him, the young man denied everything and claimed he was only joking. After school, Carlson went to adult prison for 2 years for attempted abuse. Once released, he continued to use illegal substances and failed to register on the sex offender registry, for which he was arrested several more times. In late 2010, Stephen was homeless and was caught by the police with illegal substances. He was arrested for this, and a DNA sample was taken from him for the first time for inclusion in the database. Thus, the man's genetic material was there just 6 months before the FBI lab got to Tina's bag. By this point, he had already received a prison sentence for drug possession, and the police went to talk to him. When the detectives gave him Tina's name, Stephen began acting strangely, but still refused to admit his guilt. However, with the DNA match, it wasn't necessary, and the man was formally charged with murder. Carlson's attorney immediately requested that the case be tried in juvenile court because Stephen was 16 at the time of the murder. However, this petition was denied. Preparation for the trial lasted for 3 years, and all this time Stephen spent behind bars. Sadly, on the scheduled start date of the trial, Tina's mom passed away from a heart attack, never seeing the man responsible for her daughter's death punished. The trial was eventually postponed and did not begin until October 2014. Despite his attorney's best attempts to acquit Carlson, the jury found him guilty, and the man received between 26 years in prison and life in prison. He himself continued to insist on his innocence and appealed immediately after the verdict. This petition was pending for the next several years, and in 2017, his attorney was successful in getting his sentence changed. He convinced the appellate court that Stephen was not proven at his first trial to have the intent to kill Tina, and therefore he could not be sentenced to first-degree murder. The sentence was eventually reduced to second-degree murder, and with its sentence, Carlson now had to spend 16 years to life behind bars. In all of this, he never admitted his guilt. However, something extremely unexpected happened in 2020. Stephen wrote 3 letters to Tina's relatives, to the police, and to Tina herself. In them, he took the blame for the first time for what he had done and finally told what had happened on that unfortunate day. Based on his story, Stephen was furious that the other students put him in the trash can. In addition, he had thrown a party at his home the day before, leaving a mess, and realized that he would be punished by his father tonight. On top of this, Stephen got really drunk, and right after school he came home, picked up a knife and headed in the opposite direction, in his words, intending to stab someone. However, when the young man came out of the underground passage, he saw Tina and immediately attacked her without a second thought. Carlson clarified that he doesn't remember the moment of the attack, he only remembers standing over her body with a bloody knife. In a letter to Tina and her family, he apologized and said the girl didn't deserve what he did to her. But despite the confession, many were left with doubts about the sincerity of his remorse. The fact is that Stefan's sentence allowed early release from prison. But for this it was necessary to convince a special commission that he was sorry for what he had done and did not pose a danger to society. In cases where the murderer continues to insist on his innocence, it's virtually impossible to obtain release, and this may well have been Carlson's primary motivation for writing these letters. But even though he confessed, his application for parole was denied, and he continues to serve his sentence to this day. However, if one day the commission decides otherwise, he could go free. It's also worth noting that after the man's arrest, many former students of their school spoke out about it. In those years, they said they were virtually all certain Carlson was involved, even though police had a myriad of other, more suitable suspects. This only aggravated the attitude of classmates towards Carlson, and from then on many students tried to not socialize with him. But their suspicions could not help the police in solving the case. It was only modern DNA testing tools combined with Detective Savage's desire for justice that led to the arrest. It's also worth noting that Carlson's DNA wasn't in the databases until 2010, so even if the blood on the bag had been discovered earlier, he likely would have continued to be off the police radar. Only the fact that he was caught with drugs led to his arrest. Friends, share your opinion about this story in the comments and don't forget to put a like under this video if you liked it. Thanks for watching.